Hi there, my name is Emma and welcome to my channel. I make videos on art, home decor, and DIYs, so if that interests you, feel free to subscribe. In this video, I'm gonna show you our guest room makeover. I have a friend that's coming to stay with us in a few weeks, and our guest room was not very cute, to put it lightly, so I thought it would be nice to make it over for her, and hopefully she will love it. What inspired this whole guest room was this gorgeous headboard that I found on Pinterest. The original is from Florence and it's hand carved. I found it on a vintage site and it's listed for almost $3,000. And I've had this pin saved since before we bought our house, or while we were in the process of buying our house. I thought it was the most beautiful headboard I had ever seen, so I really wanted to build a whole room around it. So here's how I designed and redid everything from start to finish in my guest room. I think it turned out amazing, and let's get into the transformation. So this is what the room looked like when we first moved in. It had a bunch of old carpet and there was like smoke or something on the ceiling and cottage cheese texture on the ceiling. So when we moved in, we removed all the ceilings or fixed up all the ceilings. We installed new flooring, but this is still giving like 30-year-old man who's single and lives alone, and he's gonna force you to listen to him playing guitar. Those are my husband's guitars, but he would never do that to me. And the curtains are also original and had this spooky, I don't know, crinkling. Why was that there? I don't know, but that was the first thing I did. I removed the curtains and moved everything away from the walls, because although this room was painted when we moved in, we like washed the walls and repainted everything white. It's time to repaint. I always knew I would paint it a fun color eventually, but just to get rid of all that egginess, we did paint it white. My husband and I went to Home Depot, and after much debate, we chose this really pretty like mauve color, which was on my Pinterest inspiration board. And the first thing I did with it was cut in all the edges along the top and the baseboards and around any light switches and whatnot before I rolled it, because it's important to do that so you can cut in. And yeah, don't mind my terrible pan that I'm using. It's very, very old. Then I got to rolling it. As always, I need a new roller, so this one was like splashing everywhere and super messy, but you know, we made it work. After one coat, I was getting a little nervous. This is kind of more splotchy than I would typically see after a first coat. So at this point, I kind of knew that I would probably need more paint. I only got a gallon initially. So I started painting my second coat, and sure enough, right there is where I ended, and I still had to paint all this stuff over here. So I had to go back to Home Depot and get a quart of paint. Also at Home Depot, I got this MDF that's 3/4 of an inch and 8 feet by 4 feet, but I had them cut it there to the width of the bed frame. So it was 4 feet by the width of the bed frame, which I believe was like 60 something inches. If you're going to recreate this, you would just measure your own bed frame. And then I used this paper that you normally place down when you're painting, so that's why it's covered in weird paint marks. But reduce, reuse, recycle, I figured I should use it. I laid it out over the wood, sketched out the shape that I wanted, and then I cut it in half so both sides would be symmetrical before cutting out the shape. And I've really tried with this step. I don't typically try to make things perfect, but I really, really wanted this to turn out well, so I took my time. I used a square to make sure all the edges were square. See, there's me doing a good job in using my square, and then I made sure all the flat edges were the same width before tracing everything out onto the MDF. After it was all traced, it was time to cut it out with my jigsaw, so I clamped the wood down to the table, making sure it was hanging over, and then I grabbed my jigsaw and I started cutting it out. This is way easier than you might think, and you can always go back and like cut any of the weird edges. You just kind of want to like go for it at first, and then any of the corners there, you can see how there's a corner left over. You can go back and cut those corners out and then sand everything down. I did not get a video of me sanding because my phone died, so here's a dramatic recreation of me sanding it. And then I stupidly brought it inside because I was like, okay, time to paint it. And then I realized, oh wait, this whole bottom area is gold and I don't have any gold paint. So after sketching it out, I realized I was going to have to gesso it and then take it back outside to spray paint it gold. So at first I just gessoed the bottom to make sure the spray paint absorbed evenly, and then I took it back outside to spray paint the whole bottom of it. And this took probably about a half a can of spray paint. It was quite a bit of spray paint that was used, and I did a few coats because I really wanted it to look nice and even. Once that was done, I brought it back inside, and then I did a little bit more refined sketches before starting to paint each of the birds. Now, I think it normally would make more sense to paint the background, but because the background was black, I didn't want to have to go over black with white. So I started by painting each of the birds' outlines in white, and then I went back and added color, and then the last step I ended up doing was the black background, just because I didn't want to have like a million coats of white that would go over the black. That just didn't make sense to me. Finally, it was time to start painting the actual birds and the designs. This I ended up redoing a few times. I was really trying to be perfect at first, and I realized I wanted a looser effect. So this was the original way I was painting them, with kind of like harsh outlines. And I wanted to see what the black would look like around it. But eventually I switched my technique to just these really loose lines. You can see I'm not outlining anything, and each brushstroke is a single feather, and this took way less time, and I also liked the effect a lot more. So pretty much I just did a bunch of lines in different shades of blue or teal and white along the wings and along the body, and this looked so much better. Oh, and then I spilled all over, which was fun. And then this bird was a little bit of a different color. Like I said, I'm just copying that inspiration photo. So I went in with this kind of, I don't know, burnt umber color. And finally, I was ready to outline everything in black, which was so satisfying. I did end up kind of redoing some of the tips of the wing after the black part. I used a small brush at first, and then I switched to this slightly larger brush to paint in the whole background. And it looks so good at this point. I wasn't sure if I was going to do molding, so I decided to coat it with polyurethane once everything was dry, and I used a roller brush to make it sure it was nice and smooth, and I did 2 coats of that before moving on to the next step. And it was at this point that my husband came in and gave some unsolicited constructive criticism that ended up actually being really helpful, that it looked a little bit too bright and new. So I did a coat of yellow over all of the white parts, and it did help it look more aged. And then I had this molding from our wedding. I was going to use it for something, and I was like, why don't I use this stick-on molding? And I got my gross hands all over it. That's what I was trying to show there. And I just used some simple folding of paper to get some 45-degree angles, and it's just plastic molding that's stick-on. I got it from Amazon. I did end up getting another roll. Like I said, this one was from my wedding, but for the end pieces, I did have to get a little bit more from Amazon. And after all of it was attached, I used some caulk to fill in any of the gaps, especially where they met, because I didn't do a super great job. Next, I realized the headboard wasn't quite as tall as I wanted it to be, so I cut some scrap MDF to create these 2 little supports that are going to go on either side of it for the headboard to sit on, to make it a little bit taller and to make it seamless from the sides. So I cut those out and I spray painted them gold. And then when I got upstairs, I realized that the top of the headboard, the current headboard, which is from IKEA, well, I messed it up because it's from IKEA, and I forgot that they have weird little screws in there, and yeah, accidentally ripped that guy off. That was my bad. But I realized it protruded out, so I needed to remove this top part, and then finally found the correct screws, and it's just attached by pegs. So I removed those, and I removed the pegs because that would have prevented it from being flush on there. And I'm just storing that in my closet just in case we ever decide we don't want this headboard anymore. And then it was time to add those supports that I created on either side. So I wood clamped them and then screwed them on from the back. I drilled pilot holes first, and then I screwed in screws, and this is going to allow my headboard to sit where I want it to. Then I recruited my husband to help me bring up this really heavy headboard, and we threw it on, and thank goodness it fit and worked and was the height that we wanted it to be, because you never know until you see it on there. Then I drilled more pilot holes, and I did like 4 or 5 screws on the back of there. So this headboard is not going anywhere unless the original IKEA bed breaks. At this point, I realized the molding should probably continue to the supports, so I went and grabbed some extra molding. I painted it black, I attached it, caulked it, and then of course I painted the caulk. Once the headboard was finished, it was time to hang up these curtains. I got these from Amazon. They're like similar to ones that we have in our primary bedroom, and I really like them in our primary bedroom, and they block out a lot of light, which is nice. It doesn't look like it, but I swear they block out a lot of light. When I initially hung them, I hung them where they were before, but I realized that that wasn't quite high enough and wide enough. So I had to kind of redo all of the holes and actually put anchors in because there was only a stud in the middle. So this was kind of a pain in the butt, but it was totally worth it to make them higher and wider. And I just had to patch up and paint over the old places that they used to be hanging. Next up, it was time to paint these closet doors. I wanted to go in with a neutral base, and at this point that I was painting this, I still didn't know what I was going to paint them, like the design. I was considering a few abstract pieces that I had saved on Pinterest, but I knew I wanted the base to be neutral, so I chose this beige color, which is actually in our hallway and some of our main room. I ended up painting this design on my iPad, and it's supposed to be kind of like an abstract design. Look, I'm not an abstract artist. Could there be improvements made to this design? Sure. But I wanted to try something new. I really enjoyed myself. I used a small brush eventually, and that made some really nice little brush strokes, and I was combining white and black to give different tones throughout the colors. And yeah, it didn't turn out exactly like the sketch, but it turned out interesting. I like it. I don't know. And then obviously I had to paint the edges because not the whole thing was shown and I was too lazy to take them off. After it was done, I realized I wanted some black edging, so I painted all the edges black, and then I was like, oh, I have to paint these handles, and I didn't realize they came out. So I had completely taped over the other side and had to take it all off because they just pop out. I don't know why I didn't realize that. I guess I couldn't get them out at first, but I painted them black, and spray paint is the best way to go for something like that. And then I painted the sides with a roller. While I was doing all of this, my parents' neighbor texted me and asked if I wanted this cute little chest, and I was like, absolutely. It's super cute, and our dog likes to sit on the bed in here, and we want to discourage that and encourage him to look out the window, maybe on this chest. So we brought the chest up, and at this point I had gotten a duvet cover and I washed all the sheets, and I wanted to see how everything looked with the chest color-wise, and I couldn't get over the fact that I found it a little distracting. I love the colors, but I was able to find this cheap fabric at a thrift store, so I washed it and decided I would recover it, but I would leave the old fabric because I do think it's super cute. Just in this space, it felt kind of busy and it was taking away from some of the other stuff that was in this room. So I cut it to the correct size, and recovering something like this is actually super simple. You just need a staple gun and then you just stretch it over. I like to do the 4 corners first, and then you just pull as you go around and staple. It's super simple. Once you get to the outside corners, it gets a little bit tricky, but just try to fold it the best you can. I had to cut off some of the extra fabric as I was doing the actual corners because it was getting messy, and then you just trim off all the excess and boom, like look how cute that is. This took me like maybe 20 minutes, and then I just screwed it back on, and we can store blankets or whatever we need to in here. Next, I wanted some additional wall decor, so I have this old mirror. It's actually from my upcycling book, The Art of Upcycling. Find it on Amazon. But it's from a book I wrote, and it's actually paper mache, and it was just sitting in my closet. But I think it's nice to have a mirror in a guest room so you can just, check yourself before you exit into the world because our bathroom isn't attached to it, so they're gonna have to walk through the hallway. Anyway, I thought it'd be nice to have a mirror, so I took it apart, painted it, put it back together, and then hung it up with a few command strips. And the final finishing touch was these moths. And here is the finished result. Let's remember what it looked like before. And here is the after with everything together. It is so much better. I'm so in love. I was actually going to replace those lamps, but I think they turned out so well. And Benny, of course, is so happy. I also thrifted those pillows and washed them, of course. But Benny's so happy with his new place to sit and look out the window. And all of my guests love dogs. You're not staying with me if you don't love my dog. So he's encouraged to go in this room, but not on your bed, which is kind of nice. And I just think everything goes together so well. And I'm so happy and so proud. And I think it's just such a vibe of a room. And I can't wait to host friends in here. I really hope everyone loves it and feels comfortable. Every time I walk by that room now, I have to pop my head in and look around because I think it looks so amazing and it's such a huge difference from where we started to where it is now. I think eventually in the future, I'd like to add some knickknacks on the nightstands and potentially maybe molding or some picture frames on the empty wall. But for now, I am still so happy with how it turned out. My dog Benny has his seat and he's so happy. He's been using it so often. And it just feels like a finished, complete space. I really hope my friend loves it and I hope she feels welcome as she stays with us. But thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, feel free to subscribe and follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and all other social media. I am on it all. Thank you so much for watching and happy making.